Welcome to Next Gen Combos with Youth Move Colorado Vista. Today, we have the privilege to interview CoSHI.
The material and information presented here is provided by lived experience youth and for general information purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are of the guests of our podcast own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Youth Move.
And we have Zoha and Theo. We will be interviewing them. How about you guys introduce yourself and talk about what you do?
Great. Hi, my name is Zoha Shesky. I use she, her, AF pronouns, and I'm the CoSHI administrator for, so I'm basically the program manager for the program, and I've been with the state for about 8 years. So our program is part of the Colorado Department of Human Services, and CoSHI is the Colorado Sexual Health Initiative. That's what our little acronym stands for. And we're basically all about delivering comprehensive human sexuality education to young people in Colorado. And we train counties, so human service folks at different counties and different community organizations across Colorado to implement training for young people. And then we also deliver the education ourselves. And then we also train adults on how to have those conversations. And most of that work is done by Theo. And I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, y'all. I'm Theo. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the trainer and educator, one of us with the Colorado Sexual Health Initiative. We have a few more team members who are not able to be on the call. So we have Goddess Taisha, who does our positive youth development work, and we share them with Tony Gramsci's youth services folks. And I think you're going to have them on a call later. So you get to look forward to talking to them. And then we also have Anna Wendt, who works between CoSHI and also the Division of Child Support Services doing a trail building grant, which I believe we're going to talk about in a little. And what the other thing that we often do, or one of the other projects that we've worked a bit with the Vistas on, is that we have done a lot of training for human services providers and adults on LGBTQ youth and how to support gender expansive youth specifically. So we've done some work both in the Division of Youth Services and also with child welfare on training adults on what are the rights of young people in Colorado who are trans and non-binary, and how do we provide gender affirming caregiving to them? How do we show up for them in ways that are protective while they are interfacing with our services? So that's another piece of our work.
So you already told us about like the work that you guys do of CoSHI and everything like that. I've noticed that when I was looking at the website and stuff like that, you guys do a lot of work with trail building and stuff like that. Could you tell me more about the trail building?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about that. So we have rebranded that to Life is Told by Youth. So that was a grant. It was a collaborative grant between our program and the Office of Child Support Services. And that's also within the Department of Human Services. So we applied for a grant to basically offer child support education and comprehensive human sexuality or sexual health education to young people. And it kind of was a interesting collaborative effort that we applied for a couple of years ago and were awarded the grant. And so we use a youth-driven approach to use filmmaking and social media to help youth break free from the cycle of poverty. So it's all about learning more about how maternity and child support and all those pieces work, while also learning about, things like STIs, HIV, and pregnancy and untimely pregnancy prevention. And so youth make these great, they participate in a group level intervention, and then they decide kind of they want to make their videos about, and they work on creating their own videos around whatever it is that they've decided is important after they've learned things in their own level intervention. And then they create a movie of their own. So, and it's professionally made. So we have folks come in with professional editing and everything, and they produce their own social, basically their own video that's then socially marketed. So it's really news driven. They do all of the work themselves. They do the editing, they write the script. It's pretty innovative and fascinating to watch. So we've done 2 or 3 already. I think you can find them online. We can send you the links to those. One is called Eclipse. That one was really great. And it was done in Larimer County with the youth there. So outside of those, we've also worked, they have a youth advisory board. They're the ones that came up with the new campaign name, Life is Told by Youth. And so they're going to be launching a website with all that information soon where we can send folks to see all of those pieces on their own. And young people can go and watch the social media marketing videos that they've made. So it's pretty innovative and interesting.
That is really cool. If you could send us the link, we could actually, go with our podcast and kind of like link it to it so people can check that out. That would be really amazing. So, another question that we have for you guys is what are things young people can do or ask to make sure they're getting high quality service or program when dealing with CoSHI?
Yeah. I'm trying to think about when dealing with CoSHI. I think in general, it's important for young people to know what their rights are across the state. So in Colorado, there is a law around sexual health education that says that it's specifically targeted towards schools, but CoSHI uses that same law as the basis for our work in sexual health education, even though we don't work generally in schools. And it is important for youth to know that when they are receiving any sort of sexual health information, specifically in schools, but also in general, they have the right for that to include not only information about the choice whether or not to have sex, so abstinence or having sex, but also that it has to be age appropriate. It has to be LGBTQ inclusive. It needs to be inclusive of experiences of sexual violence and inclusive of like immigration experiences. It needs to be inclusive, age appropriate, culturally relevant, that it has to include information on STIs, HIV, pregnancy, but it also needs to include information on consent and healthy relationships. So it really, oftentimes when we talk about sex education and when we think about sex education culturally, it kind of gets broken down into either abstinence only, where you only talk about not having sex, or like condoms only sex education is sometimes how people will frame it. But really, what is comprehensive and what young people have the right to in Colorado is conversations that involve all of those pieces that you think about when you think about relationships and health and bodies and development, all those questions that come up and those fears. That is the content that should be included and should be shame free. That's another piece of the law, is that they're not allowed to use shame and fear to try and push people into decisions around their sexual health. And so young people, it's important that adults know the rights of young people, which is what we work to do. And we also work to make sure that young people know what their rights are according to the law, to receive all the information and to be able to have those open conversations. What might you add to that?
I think the one other thing is that it's important to know that starting at age 13 in Colorado, young people can access information about contraceptives and can access those services without consent. And so they can go to places like BC for You, which is a clinic, and they can find their own services. And that's something that they have the right to. So knowing what kind of services they can consent to without parental consent and that they have the right to those things is really important, so that if young people need those services, they can access them. So those are some of the things that we also make sure that young people have access to, and that adults also have access to, in case, so that they know that that is something that young people are like to.
Yeah. We also had worked with Vista for a little bit when we were developing. We have Bill of Rights for trans and non-binary young people, and we'd worked with a VSTA in that process of creating that. And young people, trans and non-binary young people in Colorado actually have a lot of rights toward agency and toward affirmation, and which includes that they have the right to have affirming mental health care and that they can access their own mental health care starting at the age of 12, and that they can't be put through what's called conversion therapy, which is therapy that tries to make you straight or make you not LGBTQ, but it's illegal to perform that on minors in Colorado. And so, and it's also young people have the right for, what was I going to say, for gender affirming. So, for example, that teachers and caseworkers and other folks, other official folks in their lives, it's against discrimination law if those people don't use their name and pronouns. And so they have the right to a lot of affirmation that we, as adults and as a society, don't often really recognize. And so we really want to empower youth to know their rights and adults to follow their rights in those areas.
So I'd like to talk about the stigma surrounding sexual health education, sex
Yeah.
education. So I still, in my personal opinion, I still believe that this kind of education is taboo in some circles, but there are other subjects that were previously viewed as taboo, but have become more commonplace in teaching. For example, you had the infamous monkey trial about evolution when it was considered, when teaching of evolution was not only considered taboo, it was also considered illegal at the time. But now evolution's taught in schools everywhere. I feel like we are going more in the direction of, while teaching sex education is not taboo, but it's still very taboo, especially in some religious circles. You know, they often think that the solution is to teach children not to have sex, which I have more than a few receipts, as you previously mentioned, there are more than a few receipts proving otherwise, that this abstinence only sex education isn't effective at all. In fact, it has unintended consequences. And so I have to ask you, what at CoSHI, what do you do? What are some steps that you take to overcome this stigma surrounding sexual health education?
I think we do a lot of sort of myth busting around what comprehensive sexuality education looks like. So we there's a lot of misinformation around what, you know, people think that, you know, teaching third graders about condoms is part of what we do, which is not part of what we do. It's age appropriate. So we don't actually talk about condoms until much later, high school or until it's age appropriate. And so talking about bodies and puberty and some of those things, happens around when puberty starts happening, this sixth grade, some of those times. So doing a lot of myth busting and talking to adult parents in our school adult curriculum about like what ages is it appropriate to talk about certain things. And then if young people have questions about some of those things earlier on, then looking at that as like, maybe that's a red flag that, where did they hear about these things? And, maybe that's a concern if they're asking these questions too early. So we do a lot of talking about like, what is age appropriate? What is it age appropriate? And making sure that adults know that we're not teaching young people about things before they're ready for it. And that we talk a lot about healthy relationships and about things that are really not just about sex, and that no one's teaching anyone how to have sex. No one's teaching anyone any of those things, that it's really about talking through negotiation skills and healthy relationships and consent, and talking about how much sexual health education can actually prevent intimate partner violence. And so I think the education piece is really key, just because I don't think a lot of adults really know what sexual health education looks like, because a lot of them haven't actually engaged in those classes. And so they actually don't know until someone's educated them and said, here's what the curriculum looks like. Here's what we teach. And then usually they're kind of much more open to it. So that's a big piece of what we do. And I don't know, what else do we do?
But I think another big piece, it also goes into education for adults, is is telling them that like even that sex educators, even when we're in like closed doors amongst peers, having our like secret private conversations, which we don't really have, but pretending that we do, we're like, we still are like, and then we're going to have the young people talk to their families and their community and their culture and their religion about what their values are. We still want young people grounded in their own communities because we know that that is what strength based is, that we want young people to be forming their own opinions, forming their own values when we're teaching sex education. The goal is never that we tell young people what we think they ought to do. We give them information and then we say, like, what does your belief system say about this? And how does that feel for you? And how do you check in with yourself and know for yourself what is right and wrong for you? Because we're not trying to, take a parent's position or another caregiver's place and tell young people what their values ought to be. I surely don't know what other people's values ought to be. And so we really try to teach in a way that's respectful to the diversity of communities and beliefs and families that they come from, and respectful to all of that diversity. And I think that's one of the things that people really worry about. The other thing we do is that we've been working on this through a recent curriculum called Lift, Linking Families and Teens, where we are hoping to provide workshops where we have youth and their caregivers attend together so that they're able to have these conversations together and it doesn't feel so scary. Like, you're going to take my young person and tell them things and I won't know what those are. And you're going to like rot their brains in some way. But instead we're saying like, let's come together and have this conversation with both of you here and create and support your connectedness so that you're able to leave and continue having these conversations. We really do want young people to be grounded with trusted adults around them. That is hugely important. And then we do a lot of work to support trusted adults in being able to show up and have those conversations. And I think that's one of the big ways to create movement is to kind of myth bust and demystify what it is that we're doing, that we're not trying to come in and like tell young people like, go have sex. No. We're like, no, here's information you need for lifelong decision making. Yeah.
Honestly, this is really just like amazing information. And I honestly appreciate you guys for doing the job that you do, because back when I was in high school and middle school and stuff like that, sex education was completely different from what it is now. It was the condom on the banana situation, and then it was like, oh, you guys have periods. Here, have a good day. Here's a pad, here's a tampon. Go have fun. And it's like now that they're starting to get involved with the types of disease, it's like I when I was doing like sex education when I was a child, it was kind of traumatizing because it was just it was, if you have sex, then here's these many diseases that you're going to get if you have sex one time. And I'm like, yo, like, that's crazy. Cause it's just like, it was that or pregnancy. And it reminded me, I don't know what movie it's from, when he was like, pregnancy equals death. You're gonna die. If you have sex, then you're gonna get pregnant, then you're gonna die. And I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. That's makes me feel so much better. What makes the situation like better now is like there's stuff that I'm like at 23 years old that I'm just now learning, like the different types of birth control, what they do, or there's other like ways of protecting yourself during sex. Like I never knew that there was like a female condom. I never knew that existed. And so it's just like now that we're starting to realize that things are starting to be, I guess, more appropriate for the conversation at hand, that it makes the situation better for the younger youth to understand what is going on with their bodies and why, you know? So a
Yeah.
thing that I have like a question about in regards to like just CoSHI in general, you guys have been involved with the trail. Youth Move Co has been involved with the trail builders, which we talked previous to. Is there a project update that you guys have been doing, or where can see tools that have been developed? And then what are some ways that your work has helped young people?
So yeah, so when I was mentioning earlier that we have a couple that they're about to launch the web page for that. So I think that's due in the next couple of weeks. And I will share the YouTube link for the last for the Laredo County Eclipse for the movie that has been most recently produced and finished. And we had like a red carpet sort of premiere for that back in October.
October.
October. So
Halloween.
yeah, so that's right. So that movie or media piece was done with those young people and it was released, and so they've been circulating that in Larimer County, and so all of those pieces that have been created and done will be on this website pretty soon. Um, and uh, hopefully that will be in the next week or two. Is what I've heard. I'm not exactly sure when, but as soon as it's done, we'll let you all have access to that, share it. And that will also have some great interviews that were done with some of the other folks that have participated. And so there's some great curriculum pieces. So I'll make sure Anna gets some of those pieces because I don't know where all the links are, but I'll have her share some of those. And then there was a second cohort of that called Native Youth Productions, which is focused on young people who are involved with our tribal youth from who are living in cities in Colorado and Denver. So there's that piece that's sort of a newer portion of that. And I think they've just started that project. So that one's sort of newly underway. So we're not, it's similar, just working with Native youth instead of with um, youth that are in foster care and DYS and other systems. So that's soon to come as well. So yeah, so there's lots of great things going on and I can share some of that. It's been a great experience and we've met a lot of great young people who have really great ideas, and the scripts have been amazing and just really fun to watch. So
Really good. So another question that I have is, we have a lot of listeners and the majority of the time they are listening and trying to figure out what else that they can do. What are some ways that the young people can get involved with CoSHI and everything like that to get more in depth with the youth and everything else?
One opportunity that we've had in the past is that the we have grantees across the state. Oftentimes, but not always, they are county human services folks. So we do a lot of work with county human service agencies, but it isn't always true. There are a number of grantees that we have that are out in the community. And so one, if young people are wanting sexual health education through through some sort of community-based organization. So, for example, we've worked with Inside Out Youth Services in the Springs, and we've worked with other like drop-in centers across the state. And if folks were wanting sex ed and wanting us to work with them, they could connect. They could ask the places that they frequent to connect with us, and we would be happy to fund and train their organizations to receive sex education. We also have worked with organizations to have peer educators. So if someone's really passionate about being a part of this work, they can get involved, and we would be super love having young people involved as educators as well as the folks who are bringing this information. And we've had young people be a part of our trainings to become peer educators before. And then the other thing is that the Colorado Health Network, or CHN, has a program specifically for peer educators called Sexperts. And we have historically funded an iteration of Sexperts. periodically through CHN. And so if folks were wanting to work with the Colorado Health Network, they have a sexpert school portion of their website, and it's called Unfiltered. Unfiltered. And they could reach out to CHN and find out, and we can also share that contact information, share that link to find out how they can be involved in the sexpert school, because you get paid along the way for getting trained in sexual health information. And then you get paid for running community workshops to your own community as a peer educator. And so it's a really awesome opportunity for young people to become leaders in sexual health and identify where there are gaps in their community and fill those gaps and get paid in the process. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
That's super, super cool and very, very good to know. So there was a law passed in Colorado to make sure any curriculum for health sexual education met standards. How has your organization been involved in making sure young people have open and affirming resources and services?
So I think one of the things that we did with that is, even though that was specifically for schools, we did have, so our administration, our division director or our office director, Minna Castillo-Cohen, issued a memo to all human service agencies saying that we do understand that this really applies to schools, but because we are trying to stay in alignment with that law, will we support that law. And if you do in your county offer any sort of human sexuality or human comprehensive, any sort of sexual health education, we would ask that you also make sure that it is in alignment with this law and that it be comprehensive and age appropriate, non-stigmatizing. And, she outlined all of the reasons why and said, and if you're interested in partnering with someone who can help you with that, we would send you to CoSHI. And so that's one of the things that was really great, because just showing that our administration supports that is something that is important, knowing that we have the backing of our administration. And I think the other thing is we just make sure that all of our curriculum aligns with that, with all the standards outlined there. So, and Theo, you can share a little bit more about that's really in Theo's little house wedding.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what more to share about the making sure curriculum align, but we also have ways of making sure that we go beyond the standards, that our curriculum not only aligns, but also includes things that young people have asked for that is like beyond what even the standards say and what the law says. We know that oftentimes we're working with young people who are system involved, and that there is the further a young person gets in system involvement, the less autonomy they have and choice they have over their bodies and location and even what they wear. And so it becomes really imperative to us that we talk a lot about what youth's rights are. And we talk a lot about bodily autonomy and sovereignty, and that you have the right to say who touches your body, and how that you have rights over yourself and over your sexual health and over the ways you interact with other people. And so we try to make sure that we are working not only up to the law, but past the law in a lot of ways, because that becomes really essential as we're working within systems. And I had another thought. Oh, the other thing is that we try to also work with caseworkers and county folks to make sure, because a lot of times when young people are system involved, they also might be missing school, and they might be missing whatever sex education is provided in their school, and they might be disconnected from the people who might have been their trusted adult or traditionally trusted adult figures. And so we work with caseworkers and other folks involved in CASAs, other folks who might be involved in their care, to try to make sure that they have trusted adults who can have open and honest conversations with them if they do not have that same sort of connection with uh, their family of origin or other people in their community.
That's that's good to know. I think from I don't know if you guys like talked about this yet, but I'm curious how how do you go about having those conversations with system involved youth without triggers happening?
Mm,
Like, because that's something that I was just thinking about. Like
Absolutely.
I went through CoSHI when I was in the system. Like, I would have been so triggered, like beyond
yeah.
belief.
Yeah.
So,
That is a superb question. And we I think one of the huge pieces is being really careful about how we talk about things and being thoughtful about never assuming that someone got to choose if, when, how they were in sexual situations with another person. Really recognizing how common sexual violence is, specifically in with system involved youth, but also in the population in general. And so we work on being really thoughtful. And I think that's an eternal process to learn to, we never know where everyone's triggers are. And so we're always looking to identify how do we make sure that this is as trauma informed as possible. And also we have to be sure that we're creating space should we trigger someone that helps reground them and recent and gives them space and support that they need to navigate that moment. And so we do a lot of work to be thoughtful about allowing people to always opt out of any conversation or any activity or similar. I mean, this is a lot like consent, but having like, we need to not only have consent in our sexual relationships, but also in our conversations. And so creating space for like consent to be present in the way that we work with young people so that they know in advance what we're going to be talking about. So they have the opportunity to prepare for those conversations, that they know that they can opt out of those conversations, or that they know that we have different like things available to them. So we have like fidget toys and we have other spaces that people can go to, and that we're also looking out for common signs of triggers. So if a young person is suddenly shutting down in one of our groups, or if a young person is suddenly really agitated in one of our groups, that we're looking out for those signs and we are ready to intervene and support them in the moment is really important. And that being said, we it's always a work in progress because we can never you can never prevent everything in every situation, right? And so we're working with complex humans. So those are some of the things. What would you add?
And I think it's part of goes into like the training of other people. So making sure that when we're with those training folks or when we're bringing new grantees into the program, making sure that they're aware of that also and using that trauma informed lens and being able to say if the youth is suddenly acting out or their behaviors kind of change, not assuming that they're, you know, being a pain or that they're doing something wrong, but maybe that's because they're triggered. Maybe this is how they're trying to manage that. And so, instead of being punitive and reacting in a negative way, like, seeing that and being proactive about it and giving them space and giving them the opportunity to take a walk or whatever it is that is necessary. And so having two people facilitate in order for one person to be able to, manage some of that and help, instead of making it a negative experience for the young person, be able to process and take that time to make sure it's taken out in a positive way. And so that the young person has the ability to go and not be like, oh, you're being a bad kid. We're going to punish you. Because that's a lot of times what people would do. But we don't want that. We want a young person to be able to have the opportunity to identify like, oh, this is what's happening. This is what I'm in. And they don't have to necessarily do it with us. Maybe it's going and finding another staff member that they feel comfortable with or whatever that looks like. But really identifying this is not someone being a bad person or a bad kid, but it's a trigger response or whatever it is. And that we need to handle it appropriately and not make it worse. So it goes into the training, it goes into making sure that we're all aware of what we're dealing with and not making the situation worse. And so we try to do a lot of proactiveness and on all levels. And so sometimes it's kind of difficult because not everyone understands those things. So that's where the training comes in is really important. I think when you're working with a lot of different folks in different agencies, it's important to make sure that we're getting those messages across to them as well.
That's awesome. I think that it's very important, like how you guys said that, making sure notice the warning signs, because that's something that schools won't know. Like schools don't know like this is happening to someone, and they continue this conversation, and it could be more detrimental than helpful. And so I really, really love how your program and organization is ran in that way to be able to and trauma informed. So the next question, I'm just going to read this. So it says, Toby was one of our AmeriCorps Vistas who served a few years ago, worked with you and the committee to develop a trans bill of rights and gender queer/fluid curriculum that was going to be provided, I think, to caseworkers. Can you tell us more about that and talk about why it's important to use pronouns?
We worked with Toby. We have a training called Supporting Gender Expansive Youth, and Toby was a part of a work group around supporting gender expansive youth that continues to exist and continues to meet, even though Toby has finished Toby's term as a Vista. But we really appreciated getting to work with Toby. Also, Toby created some graphics to put behind the Bill of Rights. And so when it's still a work in progress and being approved through the Department of Human Services, getting a final stamp of this is cool and you can publish this. But once we do, we can put the artwork that Toby created into the graphic design. And I'm excited about that. Okay. So we have a work group on supporting gender expansive youth that's through working with the Division of Child Welfare. And we have provided the supporting gender expansive youth training that Toby was a part of in its little infancy. We provided it to thousands of caseworkers and other youth serving professionals at this point. And we continue to provide it on an ongoing basis. So we have another iteration of the training coming up in February. And the Bill of Rights is a piece of that in sharing with caseworkers what young people have the right to while they're in our state care and how, for example, if you have a young person in child welfare who is wanting access to gender affirming clothing, what are their rights and how might they access that? Or if you have a young person who's interested in wanting to know what their rights are around using bathrooms, what are their rights and how might they access bathrooms, etc. And so all sorts of kinds of gender affirming care, haircuts, name, pronouns, etc. we have outlined in the Bill of Rights. And that is in a long process of getting approved by the state for us to have for distribution. So that is, but we still use kind of a draft version of it to share with folks because there isn't anything in there that isn't already law. It doesn't outline anything that isn't already something that people have the right to. We just, tried to write it down so that people could see it in one place. So that is one. So that was a piece of what Toby worked on. And why is it important to use pronouns? I think sometimes people don't understand why we spend so much time talking about pronouns, why pronouns are important. And sometimes one frame of reference that we could use to talk about pronouns is things like suicide prevention, that having an affirming space, having just each affirming space for a trans or non-binary young person. This was research that came out of either the HRC or GLSEN. We could look this up. That each affirming space decreased a young person's risk of suicide by 50%. So it matters to use pronouns because it changes a person's experience of the world, and affirming young people makes a huge difference. Sometimes I like to use the example, and I'm going to use this with Zoa. And if I was like, you know what, Zoa, I'm familiar with the name Zoe, and that's just like a name I know. And so I can't remember this Zoa situation that's like complicated. So I'm just going to call you Zoe. Cool? Cool. And I just decide I'm going to do that because I'm like, Zoe's easier. Zoa is not going to trust me as a human. Zoa is going to be like, that person doesn't care about me. And I have now communicated that by being like, I'm going to completely disregard your name, call you by what I'm more comfortable with. I'm going to ignore who you are as a human and do what I want to do and choose what I'm going to do for you. And at that point, Zoa is not going, if Zoa was a young person, Zoa wouldn't talk to me about anything because Zoa, like, why would you trust me? And pronouns are similar, that like, it is a way of saying like, I see you, I recognize you, I care about you, I affirm you, I believe you, and you can trust me as a caregiver. And that is why it's important to use pronouns. The other side of why it's important to use pronouns is it just brings joy. Like to have someone see, like we always talk about the negative side, about suicide and all these other things, but I also want to talk about like trans joy and what it is like to have people affirm you and what it feels like to be cared for. And that like we want young people to have not just the absence of bad things, but the presence of like really good things. And like the simple act of using someone's pronouns and their name creates the presence of like really good things. So yeah, that's my long answer.
That is beautiful.
I love your answer. And it really irks my nerves when people go up there and you can tell the very conservative, very disrespectful, like they're trying to make it a law where it is a law that foster parents have to use individuals' proper pronouns. And it's coming into a law or trying to. And I hope it does. But it became a whole issue in that room. And I'm just like, what? Like this isn't just something that everyone does anyways? And it's crazy to me. Like, it's just crazy.
That's pretty terrible. And it's a piece of like the judicial process that I think is really unfortunate because we put humans into this position of pleading for people to believe them and care about them.
And now I see it from a different angle that it's about giving people a safe space. It's about even decreasing the risk of them committing suicide. It's using pronouns has a power that I never really knew about in the past. So it's definitely something that I can talk about more, especially when someone might ask, well, wait a minute, why are we using pronouns? That's why.
Yeah.
Definitely. Is there anything else that you all would like to share? I feel like that was a really good, like,
One of the things I have been considering or thinking is that so often we kind of have like, if you are from this party, you believe and support these things. And if you're from this party, you believe and support those things. And I think that limits people from being able to show up for the people in their community because people might be a part of one political party and have one set of political voting. And so they believe that therefore they're like, conservatism equals I won't use pronouns, or conservatism equals I won't support trans people or LGBTQ people or other things like that. When I think that really limits people because one can have political conservatism in some things, and it doesn't mean you have to buy the whole kit and caboodle. And it doesn't mean that you can't show up for your community or your kids or the other young people around you. And create change and say, like, actually, I disagree with this. And so I don't think you have, if one is conservative, I don't think it has to mean that you aren't going to affirm people. Like, I don't think that that has to be true. And so or if one is any number of things, like we make these blanket statements about religious beliefs in LGBTQ folks, and those simply aren't true. There are many religious folks who are open and affirming, and we can change that story. And I I don't know how we do that, but I just think it's important that we like open up the possibility that you can want to have conservative fiscal policy, and if in conserve, you can be open and affirming to the young people in your life and the adults, whatever. Yeah.
I agree 100%. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us? If not, I feel like it's a good ending unless there's something else.
I can appreciate your time and I appreciate all the work you all are doing to use together. This is great.
Sweet. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We are honored that you are here and love speaking
Honored
with
to be
you.
here. Yeah, it was so great to meet y'all.